Hello, Social Work 6700. My name is Jeff Johnson, and I'm the Graduate Teaching and Learning Librarian at the Auraria Library. And this week, so this video is for online students in Social Work 6700, and I want to introduce some stuff for this week. So to start out, as I finish this video, there will be some slides talking about literature reviews, and then the second video will be about sort of using visualization techniques to organize what you've learned about individual articles that you've found. So part of that is, your goal is synthesis of information that you find in articles. And so hopefully these are some techniques that will help you achieve that goal of synthesis. On the searching end of things, I have provided some sort of information on doing basic keyword searches using the Auraria Library, finding information on a topic that you're interested in. And so that'll just be in the form of a handout that'll be linked below this video, so in case you need a refresher on that. And then I will talk in a third video, and hopefully these all will be relatively short. My goal is to make you not listen to my voice for that long of a time. But what I want to talk about is turning one article that you find, or a few articles that you find, into a lot more in the same scholarly conversation. So the idea is you can use the references page of an article to find articles that article cited, or you can use a tool like Google Scholar to look into the future from when an article was published and find articles that cited it. So you can find more recent stuff, a lot of which might be on a very similar topic. And then you can actually think about how authors are interacting with each other, building on each other's work. Combining those two things, the cited reference searching and visualization techniques for comparing different articles, there will be a discussion board post this week in which I will ask you to try out one of those visualization techniques and some of the cited reference searching techniques. So take an article that you found and find some articles from its references page and or articles that cited it later on, and kind of put them together using one of the techniques that we discuss, and think about whether it's something that you actually want to incorporate into your research process for your work in this class and or into the future. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen with you, show you some slides, and we're going to talk a little bit about literature reviews. And for discussion here, I'm going to use the example of some published literature reviews. So you may have slightly different requirements. You may have requirements for your literature review in this class that prevent you from doing some of the specific things that we're going to talk about here. But I still think it's useful to think about how information is presented in published literature reviews and some of the reasons for that. So why do you do a literature review? So literature reviews place original research in context within ongoing scholarly conversations. So no published empirical research article that you find exists on its own. People can't just have a good idea and publish a scholarly article on it. They have to place it in context in terms of the other scholarly work that people have done, both recently and a little ways into the past, depending on how important a given work is considered. And ultimately, the literature review makes the argument that your original research is needed and indeed original. So by showing everything that other people have done, you're able to kind of carve out this space and say, people have looked at X, Y, and Z, but they haven't looked specifically in the way that I'm going to. Different things like that. And also, just I want to talk a little bit about the fact that most literature reviews that you look at, or most articles that you look at when you read their literature review section, it's pretty clear that the topic exists at the intersection of more than one conversation. So oftentimes that is where some of the originality of the research comes from, is people have talked about X a lot and people have talked about Y a lot, but they haven't really talked about the relationship between X and Y, that kind of thing. So when we talk about relevance in literature reviews, this is partially to reassure you, and I say reassure you because some of the most frustrated people I ever see in a library when I'm helping at the reference desk and things like that are people who kind of feel like they're banging their head against the wall, trying to come up with the perfect keywords to find all the articles that they need. And so the example here is actually an article that Kristen Atkinson, one of the instructors in the Social Work Masters program at Metro, used in class, and I am just blatantly stealing it because I thought it was so good and enjoyable, is the idea of a research project or a research topic that exists at the intersection of dogs, parties, and skiing. So what I want to talk about right now is that when I'm researching this topic, I might not find, I might want to set out to find stuff that exists in that tiny little triangle at the middle where there's overlap between all three. I want to find articles that talk about dogs who party by skiing, or dogs who ski while partying, or whatever it is. But there might not always be a ton of stuff that's on exactly that topic that I'm interested in. But what I can do is kind of think about zooming out. And I might be able to find a whole bunch of literature on dogs who ski. And I might be able to find a decent amount of literature on partying while skiing, and a few things on dogs who party. And then what I can do is, oftentimes when you read a published scholarly article, you'll see the author kind of breaking that literature review into sections. So here is a section of the literature review that talks about all the literature on dogs who ski. And then there's another section about skiing while partying. And there's finally a third section about dogs who party. And then it's the author's opportunity to say, nobody has actually has looked at dogs who party while skiing in a scholarly way. And that's what I'm going to do through my research. So I hope that that provides some valuable context. That's actually my dog. That's Perkins. He's a very good boy. And then I'm going to continue now. So what the literature review does, I want to talk a little bit about summary and synthesis, which I'm sure you all have talked about summary and synthesis at various times throughout your education. But the distinction here that I'm talking about is I want to use the metaphor of the forest and the trees. And so when we talk about summary, we're talking about individual trees in the forest of this of the conversation that you're looking at. So you'll probably spend some time summarizing individual articles or the results of individual articles. And then in terms of synthesis, that's where you're going to take what you've learned about multiple articles and make statements that categorize another word is escaping. You're going to describe a larger scholarly conversation taking place between articles and authors. So you're going to take what you've learned about all these individual articles and describe them as a conversation, or as a trend going on in that conversation, or as a conclusion that's been reached by multiple authors. And this can be really difficult. This is one of the things that I think a lot of people find challenging about writing, is how do I take multiple ideas, how do I take multiple people's work and make a statement that accurately characterizes all of them? So we're going to look at some examples of both of these, and then in that next video we're going to get into some strategies that I hope will be helpful. So the trees and the summary. So the yellow part in this image has an example of a series of summaries. And actually the sentence before the yellow is a good example of synthesis that we'll look at later. But you can see we're looking at a bunch of sentences that just have one or mostly one citation. The last sentence there is actually a pretty good example of synthesis, but we're using one sentence to describe the work presented in one article. So here's an individual example of summary. So you can see it's one sentence. On Oahu, Hawaii, 44.4% of homeless youth identify as part or full Native Hawaiian. And then there's one citation after that. And so that's characterizing the results of one article. And one thing I want you to think about looking at this, as you're thinking about how to summarize stuff for your paper or for your assignment, is do you think this sentence is a summary of every part of this article? And I would argue it couldn't possibly be. When I think about the kinds of work that are presented in scholarly articles, this must be one part of the results that they came up with, or even just one part of some existing data that they analyzed. And having actually looked at the article that this quote came from, I can tell you that the author quoted or cited these authors 5 times. And then the name showed up once in the references page. So when I did a control find for Yuan, it showed up 6 times. So you can see how in a literature review, in a published scholarly article, they're taking bits and pieces of the article that they're citing and using them in different places. So the name of the game is not so much summarizing a whole article, but summarizing some of the key points that are relevant to the conversation that you are having. Getting into the forest piece, the synthesis piece of this, the yellow portion highlighted here is what I mentioned earlier. So according to the research done in the classrooms, closer motion coordination between teachers and students suggests the fact that they feel more friendship, happiness, enthusiasm, interest, and comfort when interacting. And so this is one sentence that characterizes a lot of different articles. So in the yellow portion that we looked at before, that sentence sets the stage for the information from all of these, looks like 5 different articles. So this is one example of how synthesis can look a lot like, I'm going to tell you what I'm about to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you, like the classic paragraph format. So here the synthesis is basically an introduction to a series of statements about individual articles. Here's another example. Despite these risks, teen mothers often speak about becoming parents with hope and determination to make things better in the next generation, such as pursuing higher education and ensuring their children attend college and ending cycles of child maltreatment and poverty. And so what I would ask about this is, what do you notice about the citation or citations at the end of this sentence? And the first thing that I would hope you would notice is that there are 4 in-text citations following this sentence. So this one sentence represents some of the important findings in 4 scholarly articles. And the other thing I would hope that you might notice as you start reading more scholarly articles is that the same name appears in all 4 in-text citations. And so one thing to think about there, and also I'll give you 3 guesses as to who the author of this article was. It was Aparicio. But knowing that, how much work this person has done on the same topic that they're discussing in this article, that probably gives me a pretty clue that this is a pretty influential author on this topic, or at least somebody that I should explore some of their other work as I continue to do this research. So How do you find these connections between all these extremely dense scholarly articles such that you can write a sentence that accurately represents several of them? Well, in the next video, I'm going to stop this one now. In the next video, I want to talk about some strategies that I hope you might find useful in doing just that. So I will go ahead and stop this one now, and I will see you in a minute.